In May 1942, the Pacific reeled, after Coral Sea fighting exposed fragile balances between carriers and air power globally suddenly. American commanders studied damage reports quietly, knowing one battered carrier might decide the next decisive encounter across the vast ocean. USS Yorktown limped southward after Coral Sea, scarred by bombs and torpedoes yet still afloat against grim odds of war. Japanese reconnaissance assessed her condition confidently, concluding the carrier would require months of dockyard salvation beyond American industrial reach then. Signals intelligence fed Tokyo assumptions, reinforcing beliefs that American flat-tops were dwindling after costly engagements across the Central Pacific Theater. This misjudgment shaped planning profoundly, permitting bold operations premised upon temporary numerical superiority against weakened enemies thought already crippled badly. At Pearl Harbor, memories of December still lingered, while dry docks and cranes prepared for another test of endurance ahead. Yorktown's arrival carried symbolic weight, because her survival challenged narratives of inevitable Japanese momentum across the war-weary Pacific Basin. Naval architects surveyed twisted steel calmly, understanding that perfect repairs were impossible under looming deadlines imposed by approaching decisive battle. Every calculation balanced risk and necessity, because absence from Midway could prove catastrophic for fleet morale, strategy, credibility, survival itself. Across the Pacific, Japanese planners moved confidently, trusting attrition had blunted American striking power sufficiently to guarantee success at Midway. They did not imagine a resurrection, where damaged hulls returned through sheer industrial will under emergency conditions previously deemed impossible. For American sailors, Yorktown represented defiance, a floating promise that losses could be reversed despite grim odds faced daily then. Her decks still smelled of smoke, yet morale stirred as crews prepared reluctantly for another confrontation with an unforgiving enemy. News of her survival traveled cautiously, shielded by secrecy and operational security measures enforced tightly across command channels during wartime. Even allies doubted timelines, because damage photographs suggested structural ruin beyond swift remedy by orthodox naval engineering standards accepted then. Yet urgency compressed deliberation as intelligence warned Japanese forces were already moving toward Midway with carrier groups assembled carefully beforehand. Time itself became an adversary, demanding choices that blurred lines between prudence and gamble under extraordinary strategic pressure then mounting. In Washington, confidence mixed with anxiety, because industrial potential faced its earliest supreme trial within the Pacific naval struggle unfolding. Yorktown symbolized that test to starkly embodying whether speed could substitute perfection during wartime crisis moments, demanding resolve, innovation, courage, unity. Pearl Harbor's workforce sensed destiny, recognizing sleepless days ahead would echo across history through battles yet unfought but looming near. Yorktown waited quietly at berth, wounded yet unyielding amid humming preparations conducted under blackout conditions and relentless time pressure everywhere. Thus the Pacific stood poised, with one carrier dismissed by enemies yet vital to fate of nations locked in conflict. What followed would redefine assumptions, proving wars could hinge upon workshops as much as warriors amid total industrial mobilization realities. Japanese aerial reconnaissance after the Coral Sea battle reported USS Yorktown burning, listing and barely mobile, convincing analysts the carrier was operationally finished. These assessments fit existing doctrine, which assumed severe flight deck damage required extended dockyard reconstruction before any return to combat. Intelligence officers in Tokyo compared photographs carefully, noting scorched planking and ruptured seams that appeared catastrophic by conventional naval standards. Their conclusions reflected confidence in attritional theory, believing cumulative damage inevitably removed enemy carriers from immediate strategic consideration. Radio intercepts further reinforced Japanese certainty, because American transmissions referenced damage control struggles and casualty reports following Coral Sea. Context was misunderstood deliberately, as analysts filtered information through expectations of technological parity rather than American improvisational capacity. Japanese naval planners trusted pre-war studies, which calculated American repair timelines using peacetime assumptions and rigid engineering protocols. They failed to imagine emergency methods, where temporary fixes and calculated risks replaced textbook standards under existential wartime pressure. Reports circulated within combined fleet headquarters stating Yorktown would need at least 3 months of dock work. This estimate shaped operational confidence, allowing planners to treat the American carrier force as numerically inferior during Midway preparations. Psychological bias also played a role. Because earlier successes had reinforced belief in Japanese qualitative superiority, victory at Pearl Harbor and early Pacific raids fostered overconfidence, blinding commanders to adaptive enemy responses emerging rapidly. The fog of war magnified misinterpretation. As fragmented intelligence streams were assembled hastily before decisive action, Japanese analysts mistook absence of immediate American sorties for incapacity rather than concealment behind operational secrecy. American counterintelligence benefited indirectly, because no effort was made to advertise Yorktown's repair intentions publicly. Silence became deception, allowing Japanese planners to finalize Midway strategies without revising assumptions already embedded deeply. Carrier warfare theory emphasized scarcity, leading Japanese command to overvalue each confirmed enemy loss psychologically. Yorktown's presumed elimination felt decisive, encouraging risk acceptance and dispersal of forces based on flawed arithmetic. Even cautious voices were overruled, because consensus had formed around Yorktown's destruction beyond reasonable doubt. Groupthink prevailed, reinforcing estimates that aligned with desired outcomes rather than uncertain contradictory evidence. Thus deception succeeded without deliberate ruse. Born instead from enemy assumptions and rigid analytical frameworks. Japan believed Yorktown was finished, not because Americans lied, but because reality exceeded imagination. This miscalculation would echo brutally at Midway, where certainty met contradiction in steel and flame. Yorktown's reappearance exposed the danger of believing intelligence that comforted strategy rather than challenged it. Pearl Harbor stirred before dawn as orders spread quietly through offices and workshops, summoning engineers, welders, electricians, and planners with unusual urgency. USS Yorktown lay scarred and silent, while senior officers issued a directive that contradicted every standard repair manual. Naval architects studied damage diagrams beneath hanging lights, calculating risks normally avoided during peacetime maintenance. The order was stark and unsettling. Restore combat capability within 72 hours, regardless of conventional engineering doctrine or institutional precedent. Admiral Nimitz authorized the gamble personally. Understanding strategic necessity outweighed procedural caution. Midway loomed ahead. Intelligence suggested imminent Japanese action, and available carriers were desperately few across the vast Pacific theater. Shipyard supervisors relayed instructions to foremen, who passed them onward without embellishment or complaint. There would be no full overhaul, only essential function restored, enough to launch aircraft, recover them, and fight briefly if required. Crews swarmed Yorktown's decks, cutting away twisted metal and shoring damaged bulkheads with improvised supports. Precision yielded to urgency, as speed, coordination, and experience replaced perfection as the guiding principles. Electricians rerouted power through temporary conduits, accepting overload risks normally prohibited by safety regulations. Continuous welding lit the harbor through night hours, straining Oahu's electrical grid until rolling blackouts swept civilian neighborhood. Damage control officers prioritized flight deck integrity above all else. Knowing aircraft operations defined carrier survival, planks were replaced selectively, steel plates welded crudely, and elevators coaxed into partial function through relentless adjustment. Machinists worked inside engine spaces thick with heat and fumes, patching ruptured pipes and stabilizing turbines. Every decision balanced danger against necessity, because complete repair was impossible within the unforgiving deadline imposed. Logistics officers scavenged parts from warehouses, other ships, and even incomplete hulls nearby. Inventory systems dissolved under pressure, replaced by shouted requests, handwritten tallies, and trust in individual judgment. Sleep vanished as a concept, replaced by brief collapses beside machinery or under workbenches. Coffee, determination, and patriotic urgency sustained men who understood failure could cost the war's turning point. The order was impossible by doctrine, yet irresistible in context, binding thousands into shared purpose. Pearl Harbor's shipyard awakened not merely to repair steel, but to challenge assumptions about time, capability, and resolve. As hours vanished relentlessly, Yorktown slowly transformed from wreckage into weapon once more. The gamble had begun. Driven by belief that American ingenuity, when cornered, could outrun even the strictest limits of reality. Across 72 relentless hours, Pearl Harbor echoed with sparks and shouted warnings. As welders clung to scorched steel, supervisors ignored manuals. And the carrier Yorktown endured emergency surgery performed at a pace that defied naval logic under extreme pressure. Electrical demand surged beyond planning limits as continuous welding triggered rolling blackouts across Oahu, plunging homes into darkness while shipyard lights burned fiercely, prioritizing combat readiness over civilian comfort during an unprecedented emergency that reshaped perceptions of wartime sacrifice nationally. Rules dissolved under pressure, safety margins vanished, and officers sanctioned methods once unthinkable, allowing temporary wiring, unsupported bulkheads, and patched fuel lines because strict compliance mattered less than returning one carrier to battle before. Midway erupted against overwhelming strategic necessity. Welders worked inches from volatile compartments, sparks falling near fuel vapors, trusting experience rather than regulations, as medical staff treated burns immediately on deck, returning injured men to work because time outweighed every other consideration within the accelerating rhythm of crisis. Supervisors rotated crews relentlessly, preventing collapse while refusing true rest, understanding exhaustion threatened mistakes, yet delay threatened defeat, creating a brutal equilibrium where human limits were stretched but never fully surrendered amid the unforgiving countdown imposed by looming battle conditions. Improvisation ruled every hour as engineers substituted materials, bypassed damaged systems, and accepted calculated failures, believing partial functionality sufficient, since Yorktown needed only to sail, fly aircraft, and deceive an enemy already misinformed by earlier intelligence miscalculations and battlefield chaos. Command oversight remained deliberately distant, granting shipyard leaders freedom normally denied, because interference risked paralysis. And trust became the lubricant of progress, enabling thousands to act decisively without awaiting layered approvals during a moment, demanding speed over hierarchy entirely now. The carrier's crew assisted silently, watching strangers rebuild their ship with reckless courage, sensing survival depended on unknown hands as familiar routines dissolved, replaced by awe toward civilians wielding torches like instruments of fate within the vast machinery of war. Night erased distinction between shifts, as time blurred under artificial light, and calendars lost meaning, leaving only hour counts chalked on bulkheads, marking progress toward a deadline that terrified and unified everyone involved across multiple disciplines working in synchrony together. Rumors spread quietly through workshops, hinting Japanese commanders believed Yorktown sunk, fueling grim smiles among workers, who understood deception amplified their labor's value, turning exhaustion into motivation rooted in strategic surprise that could reshape the coming battle's opening moments dramatically. By the third dawn, Yorktown resembled a patient stitched together hastily, scarred yet functional, embodying collective defiance as final inspections ignored aesthetics, focusing solely on whether steel, power, and will still held against the immense pressures of impending combat operations. When the 72nd hour passed, rules lay broken but purpose stood intact, proving desperation could unlock capacities unseen in planning rooms, and that industrial courage might equal firepower in determining history during moments when nations balanced on survival's edge. Temporary repairs aboard Yorktown transformed from stopgap measures into deliberate tools, designed to mislead enemy intelligence while preserving essential combat functionality afloat. Engineers accepted imperfection consciously, calculating that deception and timing mattered more than longevity during the coming decisive naval confrontation at Midway operations. Hull patches sealed flooding just enough, allowing speed and flight operations while masking vulnerabilities invisible to distant reconnaissance observers during early sorties. Such compromises redefined engineering priorities, shifting focus from durability toward immediate battlefield relevance under unforgiving strategic deadlines imposed by enemy movements nearby. Electrical systems bypassed damaged circuits, restoring radar and communications partially, ensuring commanders retained situational awareness despite systemic fragility during approaching fleet engagements. Partial capability proved sufficient, because coordinated carrier tactics amplified limited assets when synchronized across multiple task forces under centralized command structures. Then, flight deck repairs prioritized launch and recovery, accepting cosmetic damage while guaranteeing aircraft could operate continuously under combat stress conditions expected soon. This philosophy treated the carrier as a weapons system, not a pristine vessel, redefining success metrics entirely within wartime naval doctrine contexts. Temporary repairs also conserved resources, avoiding lengthy dockyard immobilization that Japanese planners assumed unavoidable after Coral Sea damage assessments proved flawed later. Time itself became weaponized, as speed of restoration disrupted enemy operational calendars and expectations across the Pacific theater that summer period only. Engineers documented nothing, leaving no blueprints, because secrecy amplified effectiveness by preventing pattern recognition within enemy intelligence analysis circles abroad, then active. Yorktown's patch silhouette thus functioned strategically, presenting a false narrative of resilience beyond realistic repair limits to Japanese observers during Midway approach. Crew drills adapted instantly, training around limitations while rehearsing damage control for anticipated renewed strikes from carrier-based bombers and torpedo aircraft. Such preparation transformed fragility into readiness, ensuring psychological confidence matched mechanical adequacy among pilots, sailors, officers throughout the ship during operations ahead. Temporary repairs forced commanders to plan conservatively, leveraging surprise rather than brute endurance during initial contact with enemy carrier formations expected thereafter. This mindset aligned perfectly with Midway's intelligence-driven ambush concept as conceived by Nimitz and his staff during late May planning phases. Every temporary weld represented deferred risk, accepted knowingly for disproportionate strategic payoff against Japanese carrier strike forces gathering west of Hawaii. Risk management thus favored audacity, reflecting a broader American operational culture emerging during 1942 under pressures of early Pacific setbacks experienced previously. Temporary repairs blurred lines between engineering and strategy, merging shipyard labor with battlefield decision-making during critical preparatory days before Midway engagement. This fusion elevated civilian workers into strategic actors shaping naval outcomes without uniforms, yet with historic impact on war trajectories globally afterward. Japanese doctrine underestimated such adaptability, assuming rigid repair timelines based on peacetime assessments and formal naval engineering manuals used before hostilities began. Yorktown exploited this assumption brutally, weaponizing speed against expectation within Japanese command planning cycles that failed to adjust quickly enough thereafter again. Thus temporary repairs transcended maintenance, becoming decisive instruments shaping the Battle of Midway through surprise. Timing and operational deception combined effectively together. In those hours, engineering proved as lethal as ordnance, rewriting assumptions about naval power within 20th century maritime warfare history forever after. Admiral Nimitz studied intelligence summaries quietly, knowing Japanese carriers advanced while his own forces balanced on uncertainty and haste. The decision before him demanded audacity, experience, and faith in incomplete repairs recently finished at Pearl Harbor shipyard workers' efforts. Yorktown represented risk incarnate, its scars hidden beneath paint while machinery remained vulnerable to shock damage from renewed attack. Nimitz understood critics would question sacrificing men, aircraft, and doctrine on an unproven gamble during pivotal Pacific battles looming ahead soon. He chose speed over caution, believing surprise could compensate for weakness and fractured readiness among American carrier groups. Intelligence from codebreakers suggested Midway would decide momentum, demanding every available flight deck regardless condition within the coming days despite obvious danger. Nimitz issued orders calmly, masking urgency behind clipped language that sent Yorktown steaming west almost immediately. The carrier joined Enterprise and Hornet, forming a fragile spearhead aimed directly at Japanese plans still unknown to enemy commanders watching the Pacific closely. Sending Yorktown risked catastrophic loss, yet withholding her ensured inferiority against numerically superior Japanese carrier forces. Nimitz framed the gamble strategically, accepting potential sacrifice to achieve decisive positional advantage at Midway before invasion forces arrived and reshaped Pacific balance forever. Advisors worried privately, noting Yorktown lacked full redundancy and could fail under sustained aerial assault. Nimitz listened patiently, then reiterated faith in pilots, crews, and timing above mechanical perfection earned through necessity rather than comfortable preparation no longer possible anywhere. The gamble reflected earlier American failures, lessons from Pearl Harbor and Coral Sea demanding bolder responses. Nimitz understood passivity invited defeat. While initiative might fracture Japanese confidence, built on recent victories across the Pacific theater during early 1942 naval crisis. Yorktown's crew sensed the stakes, preparing for battle knowing repairs offered only temporary protection. Morale balanced on resolve, sustained by leadership clarity and shared belief in the mission, despite lingering uncertainty about survival chances against overwhelming odds soon approaching them. Nimitz's decision compressed time, forcing Japanese planners to confront unexpected resistance sooner than anticipated. This disruption magnified American advantages, aligning intelligence, positioning, and courage into a unified strike at the critical moment before Japanese adaptation could take effect fully formed. The gamble illustrated Nimitz's leadership style, combining calculated risk with trust in subordinates and systems. He rejected rigid doctrine, embracing flexibility shaped by rapidly changing wartime realities where hesitation proved fatal to strategic survival in the Pacific naval contest alone. Sending Yorktown forward redefined acceptable risk, signaling American resolve to contest every engagement aggressively. This message resonated beyond fleets, reinforcing confidence among allies and shipyard workers alike whose labor enabled the gamble, despite exhaustion and strain felt nationwide that week. Ultimately, Nimitz wagered that courage, preparation, and timing could outweigh material damage. History would vindicate this choice, as Yorktown's presence altered Midway's opening balance, decisively transforming risk into victory through calculated defiance of expected limitations placed upon her by circumstance. Japanese naval planners approached Midway, convinced American carrier strength was crippled, believing Yorktown destroyed and remaining forces hesitant. This assumption shaped operational confidence, encouraging dispersal of forces and complex timing that reduced mutual support during the critical opening hours of the battle. Admiral Yamamoto's plan relied upon deception and overwhelming numbers, stretching fleets across vast distances to lure American carriers into destruction. Confidence rested on intelligence estimates that underestimated American repair capability and ignored the possibility of rapid industrial recovery at Pearl Harbor. Japanese commanders trusted reconnaissance reports from Coral Sea, interpreting damage assessments as permanent elimination. This belief hardened in the doctrine, shaping Midway's operational choreography and fostering complacency regarding American response speed, coordination, and willingness to commit remaining carriers into apparent disadvantage. The fatal assumption reduced urgency within Japanese air patrols, leading to gaps in early detection coverage. Overconfidence dulled vigilance, while complex command structures slowed reaction times when unexpected. American movements began unfolding near Midway's contested airspace. Midway itself was viewed as bait, not a battlefield of equals. Japanese planners expected minimal resistance, assuming American land-based aviation posed limited threat. This miscalculation allowed American defenders to inflict early attrition and disrupt Japanese strike sequencing before decisive carrier engagements began. Operational rigidity compounded the error, as Japanese doctrine emphasized precise timing and layered strikes. When unexpected variables appeared, particularly additional American carriers, commanders struggled to adapt quickly, constrained by preplanned sequences and hierarchical communication delays during rapidly evolving conditions. American intelligence advantages deepened Japanese misjudgment, as codebreakers revealed attack timing and force composition. Japanese planners remained unaware their secrecy was compromised, reinforcing confidence that surprise belonged entirely to them rather than their adversaries waiting patiently. Yorktown's presence represented the assumption's greatest flaw, transforming Japanese expectations into vulnerability. Pilots launching from Japanese decks did not anticipate encountering 3 American carriers, a numerical parity that fundamentally altered tactical dynamics within minutes of first contact. As Midway approached, Japanese commanders focused on execution rather than reassessment. This fixation blinded them to subtle warning signs, including delayed American responses that masked preparation rather than weakness, a strategic deception enabled by disciplined operational silence. The assumption influenced aircraft loadouts, prioritizing land attack ordnance over anti-ship readiness. This choice proved disastrous when American carriers appeared unexpectedly, forcing hurried rearming that consumed precious minutes and created chaos below decks during critical windows. Psychologically, belief in American incapacity reduced fear, replacing caution with routine professionalism. When reality shattered expectations, shock rippled through command chains, undermining confidence precisely when decisive leadership adaptation was required to recover initiative. Midway thus approached under a cloud of misplaced certainty, where Japanese brilliance was undermined not by lack of skill, but by flawed premises. The battle's outcome would hinge less on numbers than on the cost of believing an enemy already defeated. The repaired USS Yorktown emerged from Pearl Harbor like a ghost, her battered hull masking the intensive labor of 1,400 workers who had defied physics and expectations. Japanese intelligence, convinced she was destroyed, did not anticipate her sudden appearance among the American carrier force near Midway. Sailors aboard the Yorktown moved with a cautious optimism, aware that their ship was patched together in a mere 72 hours. Every weld, every temporary reinforcement had been inspected under the pressure of impossible deadlines, creating a vessel that was both fragile and crucial to the coming battle. When Japanese reconnaissance planes spotted the American carriers, confusion rippled through command. Reports of a carrier previously considered sunk returning to battle challenged assumptions, forcing a rapid recalculation of offensive priorities and leaving pilots and strategists scrambling to adjust attack formations. The sudden presence of Yorktown disrupted Japanese timing, causing airstrikes to become disorganized. Pilots launched in intervals and at incorrect altitudes, encountering American fighters, and anti-aircraft fire prepared for a different scenario, undermining the precision and coordination upon which Japanese doctrine relied. American aviators, many of whom had trained on Yorktown's repaired decks, understood the psychological weight their ship carried. It was more than steel and guns, it was proof that industrial skill and human determination could create strategic miracles, capable of shifting entire campaigns. Dive bombers armed with ordnance prepared for Sōryū, Kaga, and Akagi were launched with confidence. The unexpected return of Yorktown meant additional air cover, increasing anti-aircraft resistance, and forcing Japanese attackers to divert attention and expend ordnance inefficiently, amplifying American defensive effectiveness. Japanese pilots approaching Midway saw a carrier that should not have existed, a floating enigma whose presence immediately induced hesitation. This moment of uncertainty, even a few seconds, proved fatal when coordinated American strikes exploited gaps in Japanese defensive screens, delivering devastating blows to key carriers. Yorktown's repaired engines roared to life, demonstrating that speed and maneuverability had been preserved despite the hasty work. Her air group was ready, trained and fully committed, providing the American fleet with essential offensive capability that tipped engagement balances during the battle's early hours. From the bridge, Captain Elliott monitored communications and flight operations, knowing that any misstep could doom the fragile carrier. Yet morale soared. The crew understood that their extraordinary effort had transformed a seemingly lost asset into a linchpin of American strategy at Midway. The Japanese High Command re-evaluated targeting priorities mid-battle, attempting to account for the unexpected American carrier. Orders were delayed, confusion mounted, and a window opened for American dive bombers to strike at weakened Japanese carriers with precision, shifting the battle decisively in favor of the U.S. Navy. Yorktown became more than a ship. She became a symbol of resilience and ingenuity. Her presence reminded both sides that industrial capacity, rapid repair, and human determination could achieve feats previously considered impossible, changing the psychological and tactical landscape of the Pacific theater forever. By the end of the first day of Midway, the ghostly return of Yorktown had left an indelible mark. Japanese pilots faced the disorienting reality of a carrier fleet that was not only intact but strategically lethal, a surprise that contributed directly to the catastrophic losses they would soon endure. American dive bombers launched from Yorktown's decks streaked toward the Japanese formation with lethal precision, exploiting the confusion sown by the carrier's unexpected presence. Pilots adjusted their approach angles, timing attacks to hit Sōryū before defensive fire could coordinate, maximizing damage to the already overstretched Japanese air defenses. Explosions erupted across Sōryū's deck as bombs penetrated flight hangars and fuel storage. Flames and smoke rose in towering columns, visible even from Yorktown's position. Sailors on the American carrier watched with grim determination, understanding that this strike could decisively weaken Japan's carrier force and protect Midway from further aerial assault. The Japanese ship's crew fought to contain fires and maintain operational readiness, but the sudden intensity and precision of the American attack overwhelmed their efforts. Yorktown's aircraft continuously rotated in waves, ensuring relentless pressure while preventing Japanese gunners from regrouping, a tactical advantage made possible by the repaired carrier's operational air group. Damage control parties on Sōryū struggled against the inferno-consuming flight decks and hangars. Explosions continued in sequence, ripping apart torpedo storage and fueling lines. Observers from American carriers noted the rapid escalation, Understanding that Sōryū's destruction would permanently degrade Japan's capacity to project air power across the Central Pacific. As Sōryū listed to port and began taking on water, Japanese pilots attempted to launch retaliatory strikes, but Yorktown's fighters intercepted them with aggressive coverage. The repaired carrier's air wings maintained dominance in the skies, preventing coordinated counterattacks that could have saved the burning carrier from total destruction. Bomb damage assessment confirmed that Sōryū's hangars, elevators, and flight deck were critically compromised. Fires could not be contained, ammunition detonations became increasingly frequent, and structural integrity deteriorated under repeated assault. American pilots relayed observations to Yorktown, whose command staff coordinated further waves to ensure the Japanese carrier sinking. The collapse of Sōryū's flight deck halted the launch of additional Zero fighters, leaving Japanese carrier groups without sufficient air cover. Yorktown's timely intervention had not only destroyed a strategic target, but also shifted air superiority decisively toward those forces in the initial stages of the Battle of Midway. Crewmen aboard Yorktown observed Sōryū's final moments as the carrier rolled onto its side and disappeared beneath the waves, a testament to the effectiveness of combined American air power and the psychological impact of her unexpected presence in battle. The Japanese command structure now faced critical operational disruption. The sinking had ripple effects across the Japanese carrier force. Akagi, Kaga, and Hiryu adjusted positions in response, diverting fuel and air resources to rescue and protection missions. Yorktown's role in eliminating Sōryū demonstrated how rapid repair and deployment of a single carrier could influence fleet-wide outcomes in real time. American pilots felt a surge of confidence as their coordinated attacks succeeded, reinforcing the notion that meticulous planning, technological superiority, and industrial determination could overcome even the most seasoned enemy. Yorktown had proven her strategic value in combat despite her recent emergency repairs. Japanese strategists struggled to recalculate the battle, recognizing that their carrier advantage was collapsing. Loss of Sōryū forced a defensive posture and constrained offensive options. Yorktown's presence, initially underestimated, had become a pivot point, demonstrating that operational ingenuity and audacious risk-taking could decisively influence the Pacific War. By nightfall, Sōryū's sinking had confirmed Yorktown's critical contribution. The repaired carrier had not only facilitated a key tactical victory, but also symbolized American industrial resolve and the psychological shock to Japanese commanders who had assumed she was lost. This moment reshaped Midway's unfolding and the broader Pacific campaign. The 72 hours spent repairing USS Yorktown at Pearl Harbor exemplified the remarkable coordination of American industrial power, as shipyard workers labored around the clock, welding, replacing systems, and improvising solutions that defied standard naval engineering procedures while racing against the relentless pressure of wartime necessity. Every hour of work carried extraordinary risk. Blackouts swept across Oahu as welding consumed immense power, yet crews persisted, motivated by a sense of urgency and national duty, understanding that the carrier's timely return could decisively influence the Battle of Midway and alter the trajectory of the entire Pacific War. Engineers and laborers worked in synchronized teams, each specializing in critical tasks, from repairing damaged propulsion systems to reconstructing flight decks. Their coordinated efforts transformed a vessel considered irreparably damaged into a functioning warship, capable of launching airstrikes that would shock Japanese commanders and impact strategic planning. Temporary fixes were designed with precision, balancing speed and operational safety. Structural reinforcements, patched armor, and hastily calibrated weapon systems exemplified American ingenuity, demonstrating that industrial capacity could directly translate into battlefield effectiveness and challenge enemy assumptions about the permanence of perceived victories. The psychological impact of Yorktown's rapid restoration was profound. Japanese intelligence, convinced she had been permanently disabled, underestimated American capabilities. Her sudden reappearance at Midway not only disrupted Japanese operational plans but also sowed confusion, forcing hurried recalculations that contributed to misaligned attacks and strategic missteps across their carrier fleet. Admiral Nimitz's decision to deploy a hastily repaired carrier highlighted the symbiosis of leadership and industrial might. Trusting the skill of shipyard workers, he embraced calculated risk, demonstrating that wartime success depended not only on technology and tactics, but also on human determination and decisive decision-making under uncertainty. Yorktown's dive bombers, launched from the repaired flight deck, proved the effectiveness of these 72 hours of labor. Japanese carriers, unprepared for her sudden operational status, suffered devastating losses, including the sinking of Sōryū, exemplifying how industrial efficiency directly translated into strategic battlefield advantage in the Pacific theater. The repair effort underscored the concept of the arsenal of democracy, in which American industrial production became a decisive weapon, converting labor, materials, and expertise into tangible combat power that could shape engagements, disrupt enemy calculations, and redefine operational possibilities in ways individual skill alone could not achieve. These 72 hours also highlighted the human element behind industrial achievement. Shipyard crews, many working under extreme physical strain, understood the historical significance of their labor, transforming ordinary tools and raw materials into instruments of war that directly impacted the fate of nations and the lives of sailors and pilots. Yorktown's rapid return demonstrated that strategic advantage could be manufactured in hours, challenging assumptions about permanence in warfare. The combination of technical skill, improvisation, and relentless effort created a force multiplier, allowing the United States to leverage its industrial base into operational and psychological dominance on the battlefield. The ripple effects extended beyond Midway. The success of the repair inspired confidence throughout the Navy, reinforcing the belief that American ingenuity and production capacity could compensate for tactical setbacks, providing a foundation for sustained operations across vast distances and in multiple theaters against a determined adversary. Ultimately, the 72-hour repair of Yorktown became emblematic of American wartime ethos: resilience, innovation, and collective effort. It transformed a damaged vessel into a symbol of industrial might, decisively influenced the Battle of Midway, and demonstrated that in modern war, the productive power of a nation could be as lethal as its guns.